So, there's a huge new security pact in the Pacific, one with some really deep strategic implications. And believe it or not, it's named after a crocodile. Today we're going to unpack the Pukpuk Treaty between Australia and Papua New Guinea to figure out what's really going on behind the scenes.
Okay, so let's talk about that name, Pukpuk. It's the word for crocodile in PNG pidgin, and that symbolism is no accident. It is deliberately fierce. The treaty itself says the name is meant to bring to mind a crocodile's bite force, signaling that both militaries are ready for war. Wow, that's a powerful statement to bake right into the title.
All right, so beyond that pretty intimidating name, what does this treaty actually do? Let's break down the key parts of this deal.
And when you look at the fine print, the scope of this thing is just staggering. I mean, this is not just a simple handshake agreement. We're talking a mutual defense clause, which basically means an attack on one is a danger to both. Australia gets unimpeded access to key PNG military bases. That's a huge strategic plus. They're aiming for totally integrated forces, which means training, operating, and, potentially fighting as a single unit. And then there's this, and it's a big one, a path for up to 10,000 Papua New Guineans to join the Australian military, which could even lead to citizenship. This is an incredibly deep level of integration.
Now, if you ask Canberra, this is just the natural next step in a very long relationship. The Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, he frames it as an alliance built on trust, all designed to keep the Pacific peaceful and stable. So the official line is that this is about continuing a long history, not reacting to what's happening right now. But is that the whole story?
Of course, this treaty wasn't signed in a vacuum. When you zoom out and look at the wider region, a much bigger strategic picture starts to come into focus.
Which brings us to the really crucial question, right? Why this treaty and why right now? Because with geopolitics, timing is everything. And this is where you can really see two different stories being told. The public story is all about trust and stability. But dig a little deeper, and many analysts see a very clear underlying goal: pushing back against China's growing influence and, crucially, denying Beijing any military access to the region.
You have to remember the context here. Over the past few years, China has been making some big moves in the Pacific. It signed that controversial security deal with the Solomon Islands, which now actually has Chinese police on the ground. Beijing is also ramping up trade and building diplomatic ties all over the place. For Australia and its allies like the US, these moves are setting off some serious alarm bells.
And a major Australian think tank, the Lowy Institute, they pretty much cut right to the chase here. They say the main strategic purpose of this treaty is one of denial. It's about making it much harder for China to get any kind of military foothold in Papua New Guinea, which just happens to be the biggest and most populous nation in the South Pacific.
So how do they actually do that? Well, it all comes down to a key clause in Article 5. It basically says that neither country can make deals with third parties that would get in the way of this treaty. Now, it doesn't name China, of course, but the message is crystal clear. This is designed to be a barrier against any potential security deal between PNG and Beijing.
Okay, so for Australia, the strategic logic here seems pretty straightforward, right? But the view from inside Papua New Guinea, well, that is a much more complicated story. And it really forces you to ask a tough question. Does a treaty that's so focused on external military threats actually address the most urgent security problems that Papua New Guinea is facing every single day? And this right here gets to the absolute heart of the criticism from within PNG. Look at the two columns. The treaty is all geared up for things like an armed attack from another country or regional instability. But PNG's reality, their day-to-day struggle is with internal security. Things like illegal fishing that's devastating their economy, drug and weapons trafficking, and terrible tribal violence. Critics say there's a fundamental mismatch between what this treaty offers and what the country actually needs. And just to put one of those problems into perspective, Papua New Guinea loses an estimated 400 million kina. That's well over $100 million every single year just to illegal tuna fishing. Now that is a massive security problem, but it's one that needs Coast Guard patrols and satellite monitoring, not a combat-ready army. And listen to this from Jerry Singarak, a former commander of PNG's Defense Force. He puts it so bluntly: it's common knowledge that Australia sees China as a potential threat, but China is not PNG's enemy. You know, for many in PNG, China isn't a military adversary, it's a really important economic partner. And it's not just that mismatch of priorities. There are other really deep concerns. A lot of people worry this treaty forces PNG to pick a side, which goes against its long-standing foreign policy of being friends to all, enemies to none. There are also real fears that a stronger, better-equipped military could actually become a destabilizing force in PNG's own, often volatile politics. And maybe most importantly, this whole deal was basically negotiated by elites, behind closed doors, with very little public or even parliamentary debate.
And history offers a really sobering warning here. During the brutal Bougainville conflict, Australians supplied helicopters, which were intended for things like transport, were reportedly used by the PNG military in operations where civilians were killed. It's just a powerful reminder that military aid, even when it's from your closest ally, can have tragic and unintended consequences.
So where does all of this leave us? Well, what we're looking at is a region and a really important relationship that's standing at a critical crossroads. At the end of the day, you've got two partners here, and both are trying to get something out of this deal. For Australia, it's about putting up a strategic bloc against China and cementing its own role as the regional leader. For Papua New Guinea, it's about modernizing its small defense force, creating jobs for its young people, and getting some desperately needed help to police its huge borders. The big question is whether these two sets of priorities are really truly aligned. And you can see PNG's Prime Minister James Marape really trying to walk this tightrope. He insists he's being transparent, telling China directly that Australia is their security partner of choice. It's an incredibly delicate diplomatic balancing act, trying to keep that strong security relationship with Australia without alienating a major economic partner like China.
And all of this leaves us with the central question. Is the Pukpuk Treaty a masterful move for regional stability, one that locks in a key partnership for the long haul? Or is it a deal that, by focusing so much on external threats, risks ignoring and maybe even worsening the very real internal challenges that could destabilize one of Australia's most important neighbors? The answer to that is going to shape the Pacific for decades to come.